In this video, we want to examine the journal article Christian Imagination by Janine Langan. Miss Langan begins her article by looking at a quote from Northrop Frye that says that few societies have spent as much time educating their people as the colleges of 21st century America. And yet the sad thing is that these colleges, these institutions, spend a great deal of time educating our students in vocational skills, in technical knowledge, but often education is seen as frosting. It's that icing on the cake that is a nice thing to do in your spare time as an extracurricular activity, but has no real place in the academy. Ms. Langan goes on to imply that in a technologically complex world like ours, imagination has been relegated to obsolescence. We just don't see training in the arts, training in aesthetic fields as a valued commodity in today's technological world. We've got to train people how to handle computers. We have to teach them how to learn vocational skills. We don't need to teach them how to imagine. She goes on to suggest that this is as much a product of the Enlightenment as of the technological world, and as evidence of this, she displays or discusses the frontispiece from Diderot's Encyclopedia, which was first published in 1751. This illustration is a typical artistic product of the late Baroque era. It is filled with allegorical figures representing all of the many fields of study. It purports to be truth being unveiled by reason. And so the central figure that you see here is truth. She has been veiled, but she is about to be uncovered by reason. Flanking her are several other important allegorical figures. Seated at the feet of truth is theology, holding a large book which I assume must be the scriptures. Behind truth is reason, preparing to unveil her. But to the left of truth are several figures associated with the arts. Seated to the left of truth is a bare-breasted figure carrying the wand of a jester. This is satirical poetry. Beyond her is another character holding a lyre, which represents music. But standing over all of these artistic muses is imagination. She has wings on either side of her head. She is carrying a garland of flowers with which to adorn truth. But that's significant. She is there to adorn truth. Theology, the technical arts, all are part of reason's worshiping of truth. Imagination is just there to adorn her. Imagination is part of that icing on the cake that Northrop Frye spoke of. Miss Langan then goes on, though, to make her case for why the imagination is a much more critical part of our modern society. How the imagination is, in fact, the user interface that allows us to make contact with our world. First, she points out that it is the imagination that allows sensory input to have meaning for us. It is the imagination that provides a matrix of understanding for our brains. I mean, we see various sensory input, our brains put it into, our imagination creates pictures that can then be interpreted by our consciousness. Langan quotes Rudolf Arnheim from his book Visual Thinking. Seeing itself banks on the imaging, simplifying, and interpretive power of the imagination. Its project is to propose a picture of the world in which we can fit, with which we can interact. It is purposive, selective. It proposes patterns. She then goes on to point out that it is imagination that allows us to empathize. It's imagination that lets us see ourselves in the place of the other, that allows us to connect with the people around us by imagining ourselves in their position. Ms. Lincoln then quotes Dorothy Sayers, the great Christian writer and apologist, and talks about the notion that creativity, the notion that we are made in the image of God, imago Dei, we are made in the image of a creative God, and therefore we are ourselves creative, is one of the church's most important contributions to the world of aesthetics. The idea that creativity is somehow a God-like, or at least a God-inspired, God-given act. Another one of the intriguing aspects of imagination that shows its vitalness to our lives is that hope is an act of imagination. The very idea that we can survive, that we can overcome, that notion that there will be an end to our suffering is an aspect of imagination. It was that imagination that allowed inmates of the death camps of Nazi Germany to hold on. It was that imagination, that hope, that gives people in suffering everywhere the ability to hold on and continue to struggle. There is a frightening corollary to this idea, though. Imagination is hope. Imagination gives us the strength to continue on in face of adversity. But imagination also has a very powerful impact on our inner self, on the choices we make. Advertising, propaganda are all based on the idea that if we can control the imagination, if an outsider can control the imagination, if advertisers, if dictators can find a way to control the imagination, then they can control the individual. The article then explores the idea of imagination as a Christian or a spiritual activity. In Genesis, we are told that we are made in the image of God. Early in the garden, Adam is given the task of naming the creatures. He is asked to partake in the creative process with God. In the New Testament, Paul says that Christ is the image of the invisible God. We read in Hebrews that faith is the evidence of the things we can't see, the proof of the things we cannot touch. It's imagination. And so over and over again, she points out examples of how this use of our imaging potential as human beings is a distinctly spiritual gift, and how it has spiritual roots. She then goes on to talk about, though, several traits of the Christian imagination. First, the Christian imagination is anti-Gnostic. The first century Gnostics believed that the physical world was evil, that it was the duty of the mind to escape this world, that we could be intellectually free from the evil of the sinful world. Langan says that the Christian imagination is anti-Gnostic. We don't try to escape this world. We use imagination to interpret it. We use imagination to understand it. We use imagination to decode. Secondly, the Christian imagination is typological. I find this aspect of Langan's article very interesting and very appealing. I've always been a student of the writings of Joseph Campbell and his study of archetypes and archetypal patterns in literature and in cultures. And Langan is saying that the Christian imagination studies or sees archetypes in the world around us, sees a symbolic significance, sees repeating patterns that tie all of life together in the pattern of the Creator's will. Christian imagination is also iconic. For those of us who grew up in the Protestant tradition, the notion of icons is one that we are not necessarily familiar with. But for the Catholics, for Catholic tradition, icons are an important part of the church tradition. Legend has it that Saint Veronica met Jesus on his way to the cross. She was overcome with pity and wanted to minister to him. And so she took off her kerchief and used it to wipe his face clean of the sweat and blood that was there. And when she took the kerchief away from his face, there was the perfect image of his likeness. Vera icon is the true image or true picture. Catholics believe that icons are divinely created. They are supernatural. The Greek term is that they are akairopoietos. They are made without hands. And Langan is saying that imagination seeks to show the divine through our lives. We seek to show the image of the Holy One. Next, she says that the Christian imagination is sacramental. She points out here how much of the great art of our world has been created for sacred purposes. Altarpieces, triptychs for the fronts of churches, art dedicated to God. When you look up the definition of sacrament, it has several definitions. It is an inward sign of an outward grace. It is an element that denotes sacrifice. It is something made as a token or pledge. And this applies to all of this notion of sacramental imagination. We give our gifts of imagining and creativity as a gift to God. It is a pledge, a token of our commitment to Him. It is a sign of His grace in our lives. Finally, Langan says that Christian imagination is eschatological. I think another term that could be applied here is that the Christian imagination is prophetic. And I don't mean prophetic as telling of end times, but prophetic in that it imagines how the world should be. It imagines how the kingdom of God should be, what we should do to bring justice, to bring God's kingdom to earth, to hand right now. Langan then goes on to suggest that we are at war in some ways. We are fighting against a de-Christianizing world that wants to put forward a modernist approach to the imagination, an imagination that is anti-eschatological, that is anti-Eucharistic, that is anti-iconic and anti-typological. She says that it's anti-eschatological because it no longer looks towards what is to come, what should be, what is beyond in the afterlife. It is anti-Eucharistic because our art or our imagination in this modern world no longer seeks to reveal the being, the inscape hidden in all that we encounter. Today, image suggests mask or falsehood or illusion rather than a hint of the deeper meaning beyond. It's anti-iconic because it no longer seeks to show the image of the one behind it all, the God at the center of the universe. It seeks to show images that are entertaining, images that blunt our consciousness rather than make us crave oneness with God. And finally, it's anti-typological because the imagination no longer tries to weave stories about what should be and how things should be. This is what we are having to contend with now, she maintains, in the modern world. As a model for where the Christian imagination should be headed, Langan looks at Dante's Divine Comedy. In the Divine Comedy, Dante is reeling from the failure of his unrequited love to Beatrice, and in a dream he is taken through the circles of hell, where he is guided by the Roman poet Virgil to explore his own mistakes and to explore the possibilities of where he can go. According to Langan, Virgil teaches Dante three very important lessons that we as Christian artists in the 21st century need to take to heart today. First, the imagination requires courage. It takes courage to pursue our own imagination, our own vision, our own vocational calling. That courage of imagination is what Virgil shows Dante as he takes him through the circles of hell and shows him how the world should be. Secondly, imagination requires community. The Dante we meet at the beginning of the Divine Comedy is wallowing in his own self-pity. Beatrice has turned him down. He has been rejected by the love of his life, and he is focused on his own suffering, his own misery, to the exclusion of the world around him. I mourn, therefore I am. But Virgil shows him that he is part of a bigger world, that he can't wallow in his own self-pity if he is going to live up to the potential that he has as a poet. Finally, Virgil leads Dante on his own personal tour of hell to show him how bad the world could be or can be. And Langan says that Christian imagination today needs a healthy dose of reality. We've got to quit settling for the warm, runny imagery that we so readily embrace as Christian artists. We've got to see the world as it is. We've got to live up to the brokenness of the world, the sinfulness of the world, if we are going to imagine something different. I think one of the things that the artistic and imaginistic world desperately needs is Christian artists who don't settle for less than excellence. We settle for cliche, we settle for trite instead of grappling with the brokenness and the needfulness of the world around us. Jesus saw the world, he wept over it, but then he got down into the middle of it and worked to make it better. We can't, as Christian artists, separate ourselves from the world in our insular little islands of righteousness and be able to reach out to a world around us. They won't take us seriously. They don't respect us. We have to be able to face the world with reality and say, this is what is real. This is what we have to offer in alternative to that. Obviously, we're hearing a lot in the United States right now about the Pope because of Pope Francis's historic visit to the U.S. Miss Langan finishes her article by looking at a letter that was written by one of the previous popes, Pope John Paul II, in April 4th, 1999, that he entitled A Letter to Artists, in which he appealed to the artists of the world to use their imagination in service of God. In this important document, John Paul II, one of the towering figures of the 20th century, talks about how he sees the imagination and the art being an important tool of ministry and service. First of all, he says that Christian art and the Christian imagination is an echo of what God said in Genesis when he viewed creation, and it was good. Whenever we create in God's name, whenever we use our imaginations in his service, then like him, we are echoing that blessing. And he saw what he did, and it was good. John Paul says that Christian art tantalizes us. Worldly imagination, worldly art seeks to glut the senses, seeks to satiate. But Christian art tantalizes us. It leaves us with a thirst for God, a thirst to know him more, a thirst to seek after him. Christian art, or expressions of the Christian imagination, help us to see in the beauty all around us he who is truly beautiful. Uh, our use of the imagination for God helps us to see in worldly beauty the reflection of his beauty. And Langen says that is why the church needs artists, and that's why artists need the church, a place that will support and nurture those of us who have been blessed with this talent, with these gifts.